Been waiting all week for that Saturday show. Tune in, see what happened, let your troubles go. Work real hard, now it's time to take it slow. Kick back and relax with that Saturday show.
Good morning, Albuquerque, and welcome to another edition of That Saturday Show, brought to you by the Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. I'm Jim Harvey, your host, and we have another exciting show for you today. We're joined today by Mason Graham of the New Mexico Black Voters Collaborative, who will be talking about redistricting and other important matters related to voting. And as we begin to observe Mental Health Month, we have a riveting discussion with clinical psychologist Dr. Stephanie McIver. There's a lot happening out there. More shootings at APS schools. The fascist and racist state of Texas has now introduced the most anti-woman abortion laws in the country. And to add insult to injury, the most restrictive voting laws designed to keep us away from the polls. In Texas, everyone can now own and carry a gun. Let's see how that works out in the new Dodge City. But first, let me get this off my chest. My comments may prove to be a bit controversial to some, but I stand by every word. Let's start with Larry Elder, that idiot out in California, the radio commentator who was running for governor as a Republican. Yeah, he looks black. I'll just say he looks black. I said it before and I'll say it again though. Black Republican is an oxymoron. Speaking of morons, this self-hating idiot is now officially on record for having advocated for, get this, former slave owners to have received reparations for the loss of their property, namely us. Can you believe this fool? Some people choose to call him a conservative, and I strongly suggest that there's no such thing anymore. So-called conservatives are now nothing more than advocates for fascism and racism, and how any self-respecting black person could support the Republican Party when those rednecks have told you in no uncertain terms that they would prefer it if you didn't exist, needs to have his head examined or her head examined. Better yet, let's just revoke their black cards. This brings up a very painful topic for me. Where do these news shows come up with this pitiful handful of Negroes who are willing to serve as apologists for the Republicans? No, I'm not suggesting that all black folks are monolithic in our thinking. We are not. But when you know in your heart of hearts that what you are supporting is wrong and not healthy for black folks, and you do it anyway, something is wrong with you. Black card revoked. I want to take this one step further, though. Right here in Albuquerque, there are black folks who insist on using their blackness to support their hustles. They abuse other black folks and lie at every turn just to get another dollar. You know who you are, and you don't represent black folks, and you don't deliver the goods to black folks, just yourself. Black card revoked. Time to call you out. Time to tell other people to stop giving you money for your selfish hustles. And as for the Larry Elders of the world, there should be no place on earth where you are welcome. I just had to get that off my chest. Quick announcement. Thursday, September 16th, Brickyard Blues and Art Experience, beginning at 4 p.m. and ending at 8 p.m., Harvard Street to Central to Silver. This unifying concert for the people will feature 505 Project, APD Blues, Ron Carter, reggae bands, and so much more. A guitar raffle will be held and will include a 5-minute blues lesson. Proceeds from the raffle will benefit veterans and people hard hit by COVID in our neighborhood. That's that Nob Hill neighborhood we're talking about. This is a kid-friendly, COVID-conscious event, so be sure to bring your mask. Sponsors and vendors include Chiba Hut, Frockstar, Satellite Coffee, Icicles, El Patio, Salt Board, and several others. Don't miss this incredible opportunity to share in positive entertainment and strengthening our community as we push back against mental health and substance abuse. All right, with that said, it's Mental Health Month. Let's hear from Dr. Stephanie McIver.
Welcome back to That Saturday Show. September is Mental Health Awareness Month. This week begins Suicide Prevention Week as well. And these are topics that tend to elude the Black community in particular. And they're serious, they're very present, and we've got to address them in every way we possibly can. So joining us today is Dr. Stephanie McIver, my friend, clinical psychologist, director of counseling services at the Student Health Services at UNM, and also the director of the New Mexico Black Mental Health Coalition. Among many other things that I know she does, but on this particular subject, we are fortunate to have her on That Saturday Show. Welcome, Dr. McIver.
Hi. Yeah, it's good to see you. It's good to see you. Any kind of human contact during this time is so welcomed.
Oh, we need it. We need it. We really do. Yeah. So Stephanie, what we're looking at right now is just what your background suggests. Black mental health matters. So would you talk a little bit about, just kind of lay out the landscape for, where we are, particularly now with the addition of COVID?
Wow. Yeah, this is a particularly challenging time for all of us here in New Mexico, but across the whole nation, across the world for Black mental health. Just because the pandemic has introduced this tremendous overarching risk for everyone that creates this constant level of anxiety. We're in a kind of collective existential angst that has made it difficult, I think, for everyone to function at the level that we've previously functioned. And if we've struggled with mental health issues prior to the pandemic, pandemic stressors have exacerbated that, made it worse. And so we don't have a lot of data during this specific pandemic time. There are some entities that have sought some data about how we're doing specifically during the pandemic. And I should say there are actually two pandemics during the last year and a half.
Yeah.
That you and we talk about not just the COVID pandemic, but there is a racism pandemic because the COVID pandemic started in March of 2020, also with some tremendously public and painful demonstrations of the violence that Black people in America particularly have been subject to, not just currently, forever in our presence in America. And I think that exacerbated everything because it wasn't just the lockdown pertaining to pandemic, there were the protests and the constant news stream about that threat as well, right? So, and that's what's unique to the mental health conditions and functioning and needs for Black Americans and Black New Mexicans, is that we're dealing with not just the COVID pandemic, but this really overt racism pandemic. And while the violence is not new to us, the constant media exposure is a relatively new thing in our public. And so that has created a level of trauma that we're also contending with. So what I hear from people that I work with in all domains is just a kind of exhaustion and anxiety that people don't know what to do with. That's what we're dealing
That's
with.
that is so real, that is so real. I mean, and we've been dealing with the pandemic of racism for a long, long time, but to be stuck and have to see things play out right before your eyes, and
Understand.
and you not being able to respond to things just exacerbates, the impact on our psyche in a way that, none of us, well, we're never prepared for any of this, but none of us are prepared for this double whammy. And then you add COVID on top of it. And like a friend of mine back east used to say, when white America catches a cold, Black people catch pneumonia.
That is the truth.
And so here we are dealing with this twofer, if you will, and how we deal with it, our ability to deal with it is a challenge all by itself.
Well, let me add a threefer, right? Because while it's true that if America catches a cold, we catch pneumonia, that's not just true physiologically, but
Right.
we also economically.
Economically,
So we've got the direct impact of COVID, we've got the direct impact of violence, racist violence against us, but we also took the greatest hit in the economic outcomes, downfalls during the pandemic years.
Oh, yeah.
More unemployment, more housing insecurity, right? So yeah, across all variables, Black America catches pneumonia.
That's right. That's right. So as we look deeper into this, and it is, and I think you're right. It's a threefer, not a twofer. It's a threefer. And the socioeconomic impact, in a much broader sense, just continues to exacerbate, our problems. The mental health impact that we have to deal with. So the denial that continues to exist, particularly in the Black community. I know that, growing up, for example, and my family is no exception, but there were so many families that had someone who was living with some form of mental illness in the home. And that was the case with my family as well, 2 times around, 3 times around, 3 different individuals. And yet we don't want to talk about it.
We don't want to talk about it. And, I think our survival across the centuries in this environment has been a lot about us presenting a steely exterior, right?
Yeah.
That has served us very well. These defense mechanisms that we have created over time to cope with this tremendous stress. We've needed that steely exterior, and there's lots in literature, there's lots in our family dialogue about the ways we have had to steel ourselves, right, to be impenetrable, right? So we don't want to reveal or betray any of our emotions in many public places. And our very survival has relied upon that kind of masking, right? One of my favorite poems about the mask, We Wear the Mask, right? So important. So we don't want to minimize at all or disparage our need to mask ourselves. That was a survivalistic strategy. That's very important. But I'm glad that we are evolving as a society into and creating communities where we can unmask.
Yes.
It's time, right? It's time that we give ourselves permission and we create safe spaces where we can unmask. And I get it about us not airing our dirty laundry. I know I have a thing frequently, especially since we're in all these social spaces like Facebook, where there's certain things I don't want to say, certain things I don't want to reveal in very public spaces. All conversations are not for the general public, but we need to create safe spaces where we can now unmask and be vulnerable and admit to distresses, which are normal and inevitable. I mean, I think if we start having these conversations that it is reasonable for us as human beings who are actually really like delicate, fragile beings.
Right.
We're bags of water.
Yeah.
We're soft tissue. And so it's reasonable for us to have limits. There's only so much that we can tolerate. We're not meant to tolerate all things, right? We have limits of temperature we can be exposed to. We have limits of physiological stress and impact that we can be exposed to. It makes sense that we also consider that there are limits to emotional stress that we can be exposed to. So if we begin to accept that, there are limits. And many, if not most of us, have met those limits, right? And so it makes sense that there be some consequence to meeting those limits, right? And some of the consequences is this emotional and psychological fragility, right? So cracks in our armor. It makes sense that we have that. You know, why would we not have fragility? Why would we not have vulnerability? Why would we not have emotional and psychological consequence to being overexposed, chronically exposed to tremendous stressors? So if we start with that acceptance, that understanding, then we pave the way to being able to have that conversation and to be able to say to each other, you know, I see what you're going through, and it would be understandable if you feel like you're meeting a limit. Right? If we could say that to each other, that would be great. And I realized one thing, you know, as a Black woman in society, one of the things that I used to value and actually aspire to is this thing that we refer to as strong Black womanhood.
Oh, yeah.
It was like a badge of honor, right?
Yes.
Strong Black woman. And I can remember having, when I was in graduate school, really, really stressful time for me. I remember having these internal dialogues about the need for me to achieve that, this strong Black woman, sort of Teflon exterior. At some point, I realized, you know, that no, I ain't doing that. And I'm definitely not doing that for somebody else's benefit, right?
Exactly.
I'm not going to be that for somebody else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The pressure of the expectations alone are so unreasonable and so unrealistic.
Oh no.
Yeah.
It really is. And
Yeah.
so as we become more aware, observant in our society about how we've been conditioned to, you know, have this Teflon exterior and to expect that we be able to withstand all things, and we observe how we're teaching our kids, our girls, to be that. I had to get open-minded about how I was conditioning my daughter. We've had some deep, painful conversations about messages that she's gotten around that, even from me, from my own, you know, modeling of that. We're having to undo, you know, just undo so much of that, so that we can be real with each other, admit that we need support, we need help, we may even need treatment. Right?
Exactly.
But I think it begins with that. It begins with that dialogue.
So you mentioned the pressure, and that leads to a discussion around suicide and suicide prevention as a consequence of these kinds of things not being addressed. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, where we are with addressing suicide, or more importantly, suicide prevention?
Wow.
Right.
I don't know if you remember in the 90s, there were so many young Black men, especially dying on the streets, you know, being shot, you know, in community violence, being shot by cops. And there came to be this term, suicide by cop.
Yes, I remember.
right? And so that was around the time that we began to consider that maybe a lot of this acting out behavior that we were seeing was an expression of distress and hopelessness. And that when Black boys and men in particular reach a certain point in their depression, in their distress, that it is revealed as conduct issues, right? Acting out.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for women, and there's an area in psychology that has been referred to as feminist psychology. And many decades ago, this group of feminist psychologists at Stony Brook in New York came up with this term that depression is anger turned inward, right? So for women, we began to consider, like back in the 90s, that we see in women an internalization of extreme distress, and in men, an externalization of extreme distress. And that was our sign that they were probably at a place in the depression process where we need to intervene, right? So when boys and men were dying on the streets by cop, by community members, that there was some acting out that represented that point in the depression continuum where white people and other people were committing suicide. Right? So that's when we began to consider, maybe we do commit suicide. Like, maybe we do, right? You know, because before then, we would always say, like, there are lots of people lots of things that white people would do that we don't do. We don't commit suicide. Yeah, we do.
We do.
Yeah, we do. And we always have. It either hasn't been documented or it's occurred in this way that we saw in the 90s, right? This death by cop. And that still exists in many ways. But so data started to be collected back in the 80s, like 85, I believe, when Department of Health and Human Services and the CDC were looking at rates of suicide. And since 1985 and 2019, which is when the last such data came out, in the Black community, suicide has increased by 233%.
Wow.
So that's either things that have actually been, that we've actually increased reporting of suicide. And that's a hard number to discern because many people who die and have, say, an autopsy or an obit, it's not reported as suicide. It may be reported as something else. Or say when people intend to die by an over ingestion of substances, we can't tell if that's intentional or accidental, right? So there's always some confusion about exactly what the death rates are by suicide, but we know that there's been this remarkable increase in the acknowledgement of suicides, 233% since 1985.
Wow, yeah.
For young boys, young men between the ages of 15 and 24, suicide is the second most common cause of death. And for Black girls, it's increasing. So I'm not sure quite as much, but increasing. But there's a discrepancy still between Black boys and men and Black girls and women. It's 4 times among Black boys and men. So I know I've grown in my clinical practice to be far more aware, far more intentional of when Black boys and men are in distress. Because there's this increased likelihood that they will not seek help, That's true not just in
That's right.
medical, physical issues, but also in mental health issues.
Hmm.
Black men do not seek help as frequently as Black women, men or women of any group. But so I'm very attuned to when Black boys and men are in distress. And so we have come to think of suicide as the terminal end of a chronic mental illness, right? Just like we think of, say, kidney failure and death as the terminal end of untreated diabetes, like we can die of diabetes, especially if we're untreated, especially if we don't follow recommended regimens, we too can die. There's a terminal end for untreated depression.
Right.
And suicide is it.
So we've got less than a minute, and I could go on, and I know I could go on listening to you. But in the less than a minute that we have left, can you talk a little bit about resources?
Resources. We need more mental health providers. Yes. But the great thing about the pandemic is that it's made telehealth available and accessible to everyone. The New Mexico Black Mental Health Coalition, which you can find at nmbmhc.org.
I'll put that up online.
Yes, and it has some connections to our providers. It's not all of our providers. And while there aren't enough Black providers in New Mexico, there are Black providers in New Mexico. But there's also providers nationwide. So one of the resources that I love is that Taraji P. Henson, who's also very conscious and sensitized to issues of Black mental health, and especially suicidality, has the Boris Henson Foundation. Through that foundation, you can connect to mental health providers via telehealth. And then there's also Talkspace, which I love online. So Talkspace.com, and you can go on there and you can find connection to providers via telehealth. But do message us at the nmbmhc.org. You'll see a Ask Us a Question box. If you just want some input, you want some consultation, you want some connection, we can respond to that.
Dr. Stephanie McIver, brilliant mind, wonderful, wonderful contributor to the community. Thank you so much for taking this time on That Saturday Show. And we're just going to have you back because there's a lot more that we can talk about.
Of course, every subject area, and I'm glad to be back. So yeah, let me know when.
Glad to have you back. We'll be calling you again. Thank you so much again. And we look forward to a part 2.
Okay.
And we're back on That Saturday Show. And joining us today is our co-host to kick the morning off, the incredible Mason Graham, who is the executive director of the New Mexico Black Voters Collaborative. I've had the pleasure of watching this man in action, and I'm so pleased that he's joining us today as we dig deep into the topic of Black voters and redistricting, particularly here in Albuquerque. Mason, welcome to That Saturday Show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right.
What an introduction.
Oh.
Yeah, let me say the voter suppression laws that are happening in Texas right now, I think really sets a really dangerous precedent for our country right
Absolutely.
now. What they're saying is you can't have things like your county give you an application for a mail-in ballot. They're removing drive-in polling places, no 24-hour voting. You know, it seems like all of the work that's been done is now getting pulled back by Texas, and it seems to be a theme for them this time of year, apparently.
Right.
But I just want to say that, you know, we really need to be watching, you know, when these kinds of things happen, because there are other states that try to follow suit. Like, you know, we saw something similar happen in Georgia and in Alabama and in Florida.
Yeah.
And there's over like 37 or 38 states that have submitted hundreds of bills that pull back voter advancement laws. So I think what we're seeing in Texas is a really frightening thing for voters, and it makes me really concerned. So I'm glad you brought that up in your introduction.
I'm glad you mentioned it again, too, because, we tend to get comfortable.
Yeah.
And we forget things. And I just remind people, remember what happened, you all, in 2016. We got Agent Orange because we were comfortable.
Yep.
Didn't think it was going to happen. And just remember, a safe state today is not a guarantee that it'll be a safe state tomorrow if you don't protect and get out and vote.
Yeah. And in 2016, we actually saw the largest drop in Black voter participation there was. So luckily we rebounded this past election.
Yeah.
But that's exactly, the sentiment that, African Americans have all of these forces working against them to stop us from voting, to stop us from getting legislature on the table, from getting candidates in office that actually represent us and our values.
Yeah.
And as soon as, these things happen, it's like, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And I would never say it's our fault, but we have to be conscious of the system that does continue to work against us.
Sure. Protecting democracy is work.
Yeah.
And we have to resolve that we're going to work to protect that democracy.
Absolutely.
So tell us, Mason, this redistricting business that's going on, where are we? What's happening there?
So New Mexico is in a very interesting place when it comes to voting and with redistricting because, unlike our sister state to the east, we actually have an independent citizen redistricting committee. So what that means is that there was a committee of nonpartisan folks, so they're on both sides of the aisle and independent, that were appointed to handle the process of redistricting. That's drawing the lines on the map to determine a section of voters and who your represented elected official is in the state house and the state senate and in our House of Representatives, our senators are statewide. And so with our process now, we're in the second stage of redistricting, which means that there's been some public comment because it is a citizens redistricting committee. So the CRC has allowed for citizens like me and you to come out to their meetings, propose maps, give testimony, and say, hey, we want our lines to be drawn like this in this particular area because this is a community of interest. Like it's a highly populated African American community or Hispanic community here in New Mexico you'll see a lot of, or maybe it's tribal lands. And so what we're doing at the New Mexico Black Voters Collaborative is being a part of that process, speaking out for the African American communities here in New Mexico because we've been historically undercounted, misrepresented, and excluded from these types of conversations. So this opportunity for us, because it happens only once every 10 years, is extremely important that we show up despite what the census says that our population numbers are and where we're located on the map. Because when we're able to identify where our communities are and say, in this particular area, there is a growth of the African American community, we want to make sure that this community isn't split up between this district and that one. So when they go to the polls, they're all voting for one person that represents them and represents their community effectively and accurately.
So that brings me to two questions. You mentioned maps. Are there some maps already at play out there that people are pushing?
Yeah, so there's a tool online where there's been a lot of map proposals and testimony, and right now it looks mostly like the Native American community has been able to say, we want these areas of our tribal lands protected and under one district or under a few districts. Okay. Because that way the population of Native Americans in those areas are able to have a balanced vote compared to the rest of the people who live in that area. So there's been some great work done by the Pueblo Council of Governors. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
The Hispanic community has also been able to submit some things, and then just regular citizens too, who are just speaking up for like their community. So like maybe like the West Side has been seeing quite a bit of growth over there. So now a lot of people are proposing that, hey, maybe we need 2 districts to represent the West Side. That has repercussions across the entire map, unfortunately. And so the proposals and the commentary that's been happening has been kind of a mixture of all that. And luckily, because it is an independent committee, they have to take all of these opinions and ideas and these proposals into account before they create the maps that end up getting passed on to the legislature in December.
So my next question is, you mentioned, possibly dividing up existing districts and what the repercussions of something like that could be. And I know there's a lot of talk about District 19 being the bluest district, being the most diverse district in Albuquerque, and yet some people are talking about splitting it up. What are you hearing about that?
So the interesting thing about District 19 is that if viewers don't know, that's the international district.
Right.
And so in the international district, we have probably the most culturally diverse area in New Mexico.
Right.
And actually in our state, we've seen quite an increase of the Asian American and Pacific Islander population. A lot of those people live in the international district. There's a good portion of African Americans that live and have existed in the international district. It's right across from the Air Force Base as well.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing is because of some of the population growth in other areas, they're saying, this area isn't growing as much, quote unquote. And so maybe if we get rid of this area and have the other districts surrounding it kind of make up that particular area, it'll even out. But the fact is that the CRC has, they're responsible by law to maintain communities of interest. And so because the international district is one of those communities, if they was to remove it or propose a map that excludes District 19 and moves it somewhere else where it's no longer the international district, I personally think that they would be failing on that front. And so there's a lot of talk right now to preserve that area. They just appointed Kay Borinque, I hope I'm saying her name right, as the representative for District 19. She gets to be the representative there for a little over a year, even if they do decide to remove the district. But because of the interest of the community there, because we understand its ethnic diversity, I hope that doesn't happen. And I know that there are legislators like Kay, like Senator Pope, who's actually the state senator for the West Side, who are going to fight to maintain that district and maybe try to move the map around in another way that can address the population growth.
So is there anything that we as just everyday citizens here can do to help ensure that there are no shenanigans?
Yes. So the CRC has public meetings, and they start on September 17th. And going from September 17th all the way to, I gotta check my notes here, October 15th, they'll be having a series of meetings. You can go there in person. They're also virtual if you want to be online. And if you just look up New Mexico Citizen Redistricting Committee online, you can find their website, and then it'll point you to the place where you can submit public commentary. And so you can say, hey, I want my community, the international district, to remain on the map in this way, or maybe it should be expanded to increase the population so it evens out to other areas. And so us as citizens, because we have this ability to have this kind of conversation and input with the CRC, we have to show up to the meetings, of course, and then you can be in the Zoom, raise your hand at the part where they allow public testimony, or you could submit a written proposal through their portal. They have to consider everything that is said, everything that's submitted. You can even draw your own maps and submit them. And that's going to give you as an everyday citizen an opportunity to be involved in the process. And that's what we're trying to do with New Mexico Black Voters Collaborative as well. Try to get as many African Americans involved in this process as well to raise their hand and say, hey, this is where I am. This is where we are as a community, because African Americans, we're not confined to any one geographic location here in New Mexico.
That's right.
And so without that happening, without any input, then they simply just don't know, and they will have to consider other testimony, other proposals that have been brought before them.
So are we doing any map drawing?
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah. So NMBVC, we have a working group right now that's going to go between now and the end of the month where we're trying to identify all the communities of interest for the Black community. We have some areas on the map that are important to us around Roswell, Las Cruces, in Eddy County, and Clovis, that, there are some lines there that are kind of, interesting to us because they've been drawn, some time ago, at least 10 years ago is when this last process happened. And so because we were seeing growth in the African American and some of these other areas as well, we want to make sure that they're equally represented. And so we're going to be at those meetings come October saying, hey, we need these areas preserved. This is what the district should look like, and this is how the African American population should be represented in this district.
Fantastic. We've been talking with Mason Graham of the New Mexico Black Voters Collaborative, and this is important news. And remember, CRC, September 10th to October 15th. We've got to be there, y'all. We've got to be there. Mason, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
That Saturday show. Let's hear some good news from Hassani Olujimi.
Thank you, and welcome to Good News News. I'm your correspondent, Hassani Olujimi, and I'm Gugu for Good News. The goal of this segment is to inspire and uplift you, the viewer, with nothing but good news. Let's jump right in, shall we? Our first story reads like this. Restaurant makes special chocolate for blind customer with birthday message in Braille. Let's dig a little deeper, shall we? There may be thousands of ways to say happy birthday, but the sweetest of them all may very well be a special chocolate message that was recently served up by an amazingly thoughtful restaurant staff. Now, what gave the message an even greater meaning was that there was no advanced planning involved. When the restaurant crew learned the dinner that Natalie Tepe was sharing with her friend Claire was a birthday celebration, they took it upon themselves to find and recreate the Braille translation that summed up their best wishes in a chilled chocolate way. Natalie said, "My mind was blank for a second, and then I was like, is this Braille?" I've never had anything happen like that before. It was wild. They really did go above and beyond. Now, isn't that good news? Happy belated birthday, Natalie. Now, let's take a look at the shocking but delightful moment.
He's so net. I want you to give me your hand.
Freaking way. They did not.
You guys are amazing.
Oh my gosh. Are you kidding me? That is insane. Oh my god.
Awesome gesture. Now, what do you call Chewbacca when he has chocolate in his hair? Chocolate chip Wookie. Don't look at me that way, young lady. But what do you call a lamb covered in chocolate? A candy bar. And we're moving along. Now, for you sports fans, here's something for you. See, I'm not a sports fan. I don't know if you're supposed to make a home run while playing football. But anyway, I digress. Michigan secured the 2021 Little League World Series title with a 5-2 win over Ohio in Williamsport, Pennsylvania on Sunday, the 29th of August. Taylor North Little League is the first Michigan team to win the championship since 1959. Isn't that good news? I'm proud of you young people. You really put in the work and it paid off. Now, How is a Little League All-Star team similar to a pancake? They both need good batters. Okay, I'm sorry. Well, Little Big Mama is not here today, but she did send in a question for our viewers. Her question is, what did the Buddhist ask the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. And she also sent in a special video clip of her bloopers. Let's take a look, shall we? This is gonna be good.
What did the mama tomato say to the baby tomato while they were taking a walk in the park? Catch up! Now, I want to tell you about my dear old father. He used to tell me I loved alphabet soup. Alphabet. What's an alphabet?
Lord.
Here we go. You know it's gonna be a doozy. Thank you. Did it again. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. He looks just like you. Oh. Bye, baby.
Gotta do that over. The best way to turn a frown upside down is to hang with Little Big Mama. I'm your correspondent, Hassani Olujimi, featuring Little Big Mama, of course. We'll see you right here next time on That Saturday Show with more good news.
We've got good representation at our city level at this point in the person of Nicole Rogers, African American liaison to the Mayor's Office for Business and Community Development. Nicole, thank you. Come on up here.
Good afternoon. How are we doing out there? All right, fired up for change. My name's Nicole Rogers, and I have the honor of serving as the African American Community and Business Liaison for the city of Albuquerque. And I thought long and hard about what to say today as we gather to commemorate 58 years ago, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And I thought about my own ancestors and what they went through, and we're still fighting. We're still doing this, and it was heavy on my heart. I thought of my own experiences with voting in the state, and in the 2008 primaries, I went to vote at a school, and they said I couldn't vote because there was a discrepancy between what the system said as far as my party and what my voter registration card said. And they refused to take my ballot. In that moment, voting rights became very real for me. I cried at the polling station and said, "What do you mean I can't vote? I'm a Democrat. It says here what my party is on my voter registration card." Well, I'm sorry, our system says you are undecided and you cannot vote. I called the news, I called family, I called people that I knew to figure out what to do to make sure that my voice counted. I had to go all the way to Linda Stover's office and have them actually look at my original voter registration card to see what I put in order for them to accept my vote. So thinking about that today, it's nothing compared to what our ancestors have gone through for this right. But it gave me a little glimpse into what it feels like to have your voice removed or potentially removed. I thought about a gentleman that we don't always hear about when we talk about the March on Washington. We hear about Martin Luther King and the iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, but not a lot of people really talk about A. Philip Randolph, who was the principal organizer of the March on Washington. He actually planned a march in 1941, and it was specifically to protest black soldiers' exclusion from World War II defense jobs and the New Deal program. The day before the event, President Franklin D. Roosevelt met with Randolph and agreed to issue an executive order to establish the Fair Employment Practice Committee. And in return, Randolph called off the march, right? But 4 or 5 years later, Congress dissolved this, right? And it took us 20 years again to even get equal opportunity going in our country. So then in 1963, we speed up a little bit, and the world witnessed civil rights protesters and demonstrators be brutalized on national television, which set the stage for the momentum for the March on Washington. A lot of people don't know that there was actually 2 groups planning this march. One was A. Randolph and his associates, and the other was Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They decided to join forces together to make plans to have a massive march on Washington. And that's what we saw 58 years ago. And so I tell that story because for me, what it made me remind me of is unity. We really, in our communities, I'm loving to see that we're doing more of that now. More collaborating, more getting together, more organizing. But we need to do more, especially in our communities of color in New Mexico. All of us getting together to fight for voting rights and freedom and justice for all. So I just want to remind you and leave us with that unity is our way. Unity is how we're going to bring change about for locally and nationally. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for being here. And remember, unity. Can everybody yell unity for me? Unity. That is what we need to move forward. Thank you very much.
Let me call up our district attorney, Raul Torres. Raul, come on up here and join us, please. Raul has been spending some time fighting to make some things happen, particularly in the international district. And as he's coming up, one of the things that stands out for me that's most disturbing is we ask why hasn't something positive happened in the international district. People tell you that they use the international district as a fundraiser and then the funds disappear. That crap has got to stop. But I know that Raul's been fighting for a long time to get some things happening. So let's hear from our own DA, Raul Torres.
So the first thing I want to do is thank you for being active and engaged citizens. Everything that is great about this country has started with a group of committed citizens who recognize that they have power, that they have the ability to shape their community. And nothing could be more profound and more important than standing up and defending the most basic right to participate in democracy. And so it's incredibly important that we gather here and that we honor the expansion of the franchise in this country, because it hasn't come without a fight. Over time, we have unlocked the keys of the American dream by adding to the roster those citizens who were once excluded. And they don't have that right. They do not speak for you, they do not speak for this community, and they have no right to interfere with the march of progress and the basic rights of the people to enjoy their freedom. And I am extraordinarily privileged to serve in an office that has the ability to stand up and say no. And one thing that you need to understand, we are in the middle of this lawsuit right now. And one of the things that we've done is issued subpoenas to Facebook to give us the information of the people who have used that platform to organize right-wing militia groups to come out into our streets. And guess what? Facebook just told my office that they won't turn over the information. And guess what? we're about to get into a real big fight with Facebook over that issue. We have to be engaged. We have to pay attention. And we have to recognize, first and foremost, that the duty of citizenship is not to advance a narrow understanding of liberty, where I get to do whatever I want, whenever I want, without consequence, without an appreciation that I am my brother's keeper and I am my sister's keeper. And it is not just about whether or not you have the freedom to not wear a mask or not take a shot, because guess what? We're all in this together. And the duty of citizenship starts with a recognition that my destiny is wrapped up in your destiny, that my freedom is wrapped up in your freedom. We need to expand and rediscover what it means to be a true citizen. And it starts with service and an appreciation, first and foremost, for the dignity of other human beings. I hope that's what brought you to the park today. I hope that's what brought you to this rally. Keep up the fight. We need you out there. Now that's a district attorney.
The Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice has been serving the communities of Albuquerque for nearly 40 years. Peace and justice are the motivators for the work we do, in concert with dozens of other organizations and committees here and around the country. Whether the issue is nuclear weapons, or police brutality and murders, or homelessness and hunger, or even climate justice, immigration, and prisons, the center continues to stand shoulder to shoulder with community organizations dedicated to doing the good work, the necessary work. But we can't do it without your help. COVID didn't take a break, and we didn't either. And the financial cost of being strong advocates and providing assistance have not diminished. You can help us by becoming a member of the Peace and Justice Center for $40, or simply make a donation. You can also stop by the center and maybe purchase one of our popular yard signs to let your neighbors know where you stand on important social justice matters. We need you. Get in touch at www.abqpeaceandjustice.org or call us at 505-268-9557. Thank you for your support, and thank you for standing up for peace and justice.
Until the next time, it's time to say goodbye. When you out here in the streets, keep it real, 505. We love everybody, we just want to let you know. Thanks for tuning in to that Saturday show.